They know that Roundup causes cancer and they know that it causes non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. The company has been very open that it's trying to obtain some type of liability shield, some type of protection from this litigation.
Glyphosate is the most widely used weed killer in America. It's also at the center of over 180,000 cancer lawsuits. So why is Congress trying to make it harder for people to sue? My name is James Lee, and this is Beyond the Headlines on Breaking Points. In 1974, Monsanto, now owned by Bayer, released Roundup, their flagship herbicide. Its active ingredient, glyphosate, a chemical now sprayed on about 60% of all US crops. While most of the mainstream scientific establishment continues to insist that glyphosate is safe, in 2015 the World Health Organization classified it as probably carcinogenic to humans. Since then, Bayer has faced over 180,000 lawsuits and paid out more than $12 billion in damages. So their new strategy? Lobby to make it illegal to sue them. At least 11 states have now introduced bills to shield pesticide manufacturers from liability. And buried in the latest House Appropriations bill is language that could block states from requiring stronger warning labels, even when courts have ruled otherwise. Which raises an important question. Are we witnessing a corporate cover-up at the highest level at the expense of public health? To help us break all of this down, I'm joined today by Dr. Alexandra Munoz, a toxicologist and research scientist with a PhD in molecular toxicology and carcinogenesis from New York University, to help us separate fact from fiction on glyphosate and to help us understand what's at stake if this legislation becomes law. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Munoz.
Thank you so much for having me today. It's great to be here.
I definitely want to get into all the science, but I first want to start with the current legislative landscape because you just came from the halls of Congress. So what exactly is going on there with the state bills and also this House Appropriations bill and the clause in it that potentially protects Bayer and other pesticide companies from future lawsuits?
Well, there's actually two different versions of what's being proposed. There's the version that was proposed in a lot of the states earlier this year at the beginning of the legislative season. I think bills were introduced in 11 or 12 states, and most of them were defeated already, but it did pass in North Dakota and Georgia. And those bills are structured in a way where the language is creating a very clear liability shield for these companies. It presumes that the EPA-approved labels are sufficient to warn people about the actual health risks of these products, but that's not actually the case. And it gives them this presumption of sufficiency that essentially blocks all failure to warn claim lawsuits from proceeding past the first motion to dismiss. And then at the federal level, we have a very different type of provision that's now been slipped into the appropriations bill, Section 453 of the Federal Interior Appropriations Bill. And this language is structured in a completely different way than what we've seen in the states. Instead of doing anything really specific with creating any type of liability shield overtly, it very covertly creates the liability shield by blocking funding for label updates that would occur through Section Q of FIFRA, which is the misbranding provision of FIFRA. And essentially what it does is it creates impossibility defense for these companies when they have a failure to warn claim, because they can now say that they weren't able to update their label to have the cancer warning on it because the funding is being blocked for the particular type of update that they would need. And because of that, the cases are most likely to be dismissed before they even start.
Got it. Okay, so that's a bit disconcerting because they're almost able to claim, no, we don't have immunity. You can still sue us, but then the outcome in most cases is that that lawsuit will probably not yield any kind of fruitful result for the litigant.
Exactly. And that's exactly what they want, right? The company has been very open that it's trying to obtain some type of liability shield, some type of protection from this litigation because of all the lawsuits that they've been dealing with Roundup. And they know that Roundup causes cancer and they know that it causes non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And instead of changing their label, which they could do at any time by requesting it right now, they could simply say, we're going to make a new label and put a cancer warning on it because we don't want people to die from this anymore. Instead of doing that, they're doing all of this other, lobbying and advertising and convincing people that they need this in order for their business to survive.
That's true. 'Cause I think from a business side, like if your entire agricultural business runs on these kind of GMO crops and glyphosate is a key component of you making money, it becomes challenging to say, hey, do we want to put more warning labels? Then are these people handling it going to still work here? I think it creates like a business challenge, does it not?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's what, that's a lot of the reasoning behind why they're promoting and supporting the legislation is that they're saying that they need it to protect their businesses.
Okay, so I do want to jump into some of the science behind it now that you've touched on that, because I think there is a lot of confusion around glyphosate. So based on your studies, you're a toxicologist, what does the science actually say about the health risks, and how does that differ? How does that science differ from, like, let's say, the Bayer perspective? Because I've heard their communications people say, no, we've done study after study for decades and it doesn't cause any problems, versus maybe some of the independent studies that are out there.
So I'm a molecular toxicologist, which means that my specialty is understanding the molecular mechanisms by which toxins produce cancer at the cellular level. And so when I started to approach the glyphosate literature, that's where I started, was looking at the molecular studies and what had been done and what are the mechanisms of carcinogenesis of glyphosate. And there is substantial evidence at the molecular level that glyphosate is operating as a carcinogen, both by itself and in combination with the other chemicals that are found in things like Roundup. What happens with glyphosate and Roundup is that it causes something called oxidative stress, and that produces all of these really reactive molecules inside the cell. And those reactive molecules tend to bind to things and then damage them. When oxidative stress happens inside the nucleus, it damages the DNA. And what happens with this particular chemical is that it creates double DNA double strand breaks, which separates the helix in part. And when you've got that type of DNA damage, then you're looking at something that is most likely a carcinogen. And what we're seeing with glyphosate and these glyphosate-based herbicides is that they're causing DNA double strand breaks, and they're causing them at a level that can't be repaired in time for the cell to heal itself. And that is essentially what leads to the progression of events that will result in non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. On top of this really strong molecular evidence, there's also substantial studies in animal models that have been done showing that glyphosate can cause numerous types of cancers in rats. And there's really strong evidence at the human level in population studies that have been done, epidemiologic evidence showing that it causes a 41% increase in the risk for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So the body of knowledge that's there from the peer-reviewed academic literature is very strong and very clear. And the studies that Monsanto did are absolutely insufficient to evaluate this. And oftentimes they have flooded the literature with irrelevant toxicological tests that they know will be negative to make it seem like there's evidence on both sides. But that's not really the case at all. The evidence is very clear.
Gotcha. Okay. I do want to tie in the food conversation a little bit, because I think most people don't realize how tied in glyphosate is to our agriculture. So can you explain, in terms of eating food with glyphosate sprayed on it, what kinds of health risks do we know about that?
So the exposure in food is a bit different because the glyphosate converts to a different compound version of itself when it sort of dries out on the food itself. And that version of the compound has some different impacts when it goes through the system. And I don't know that body of literature as well as I know the molecular mechanisms of the first type of exposure. But from what I have read, it does seem like even though it doesn't operate in the same way to lead to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, it could still be dangerous in terms of promoting cancer. And it also seems to have some type of impact interacting with the microbiome. So it does seem like it can kill certain important bacteria that are in the microbiome and then lead to changes in health through that pathway.
Got it. Okay. So before I let you go, I just want to sort of learn about the next steps that you're taking in terms of the legislation and how that, you expect that to develop, and if where people can follow you for that information.
So we are in the process of trying to get this Section 453 completely removed from the federal House Interior Appropriations Bill. And people can follow me on Instagram or on X for updates about when it's moving through the House. Right now, we're looking at a potential floor vote sometime at the beginning of September, and we'll definitely be trying to ramp up attention around this because a lot of people don't know about it at the moment. So if you're interested in helping, I think spreading the word at the moment is something that's really important, as well as taking time to contact your own personal representative in the House and let them know that you do not want any type of liability shield, any type of immunity provision for this agrochemical business, and that they should completely strike Section 453 from the appropriations bill.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I think this was helpful for me in terms of just like separating the fact from fiction as far as like, hey, what's true about glyphosate, what's fear mongering. So I think that was really helpful. Thank you so much, and really appreciate your efforts in advocating for, the regular average consumer.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate talking with you about this today.
That is it for me this week. If you want more stories that the mainstream media is unwilling to cover, head on over to my channel, 5149 with James Lee. The link will be in the description below. And as always, thank you for your time today, and keep on tuning into Breaking Points.